Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to call this meeting of the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources to order. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Anderson?
Present.
Assemblywoman Black?
Here.
Assemblywoman Brown May?
Here.
Assemblywoman Carlton?
Here.
Assemblywoman Cohen?
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison?
Here.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez?
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson? Assemblywoman Martinez?
Present.
Assemblywoman Titus?
Here.
Assemblyman Wheeler?
Here.
Chair Watts?
Here. Have a quorum. Please mark Assemblywoman Hanson present as she arrives. Before we start, a few quick housekeeping announcements. Members of the public may participate in our meetings in a variety of ways. Information on how to participate can be found on every committee meeting agenda, as well as on the help page at the Nevada Legislature's website. A link to the help page is in a header at the top of every web page on the legislative website. Participants must register to participate and can submit opinion polls or sign up to testify or provide public comment by phone. Written comments can also be emailed to asmnr@asm.state.nv.us before, during, or up to 48 hours after a meeting. Committee exhibits or amendments must be submitted electronically in PDF form to our committee manager no later than 4 p.m. the business day prior to the meeting. Amendments must include a bill number, statement of intent, and contact information. All submitted exhibits can be found on the Nevada Legislature's website, where you can also sign up for personalized legislative tracking. We ask that public comment be limited to 2 minutes so that all speakers can be accommodated and we can get through our agenda in a timely manner. And of course, as other housekeeping items, whenever motions are being made, I ask that members please provide their name as well for clarity on the record, and for all members to keep their microphones muted when they are not speaking. And would just like to note for the Secretary that Assemblywoman Hanson is present. With that, members, we are going to take the items on the agenda out of order today. We are going to start with Assembly Bill 72. This bill revises provisions relating to the Nevada State Board on Geographic Names. With that, I will turn over the floor to the presenter. As soon as you're ready, you may proceed with your presentation of the bill.
Good afternoon. My name is Cynthia LaFramboise, and I am the State Archives Manager at the Nevada State Library Archives and Public Records. I am here today representing the State Board on Geographic Names as its chair. The statement of intent for this bill is to add the Nevada Indian Commission to its current 11-member board. Thank you for this opportunity to introduce AB 72 to the committee. The State Board on Geographic Names exists as the official agent for place naming between state, local, and federal agencies, establishes a procedure for the retention and formal recognition of existing names, standardizes the procedure for naming or renaming geographic features within state borders, avoid or eliminate whenever possible the duplication of names and to correct spelling errors, and finally, to retain and enhance the significance, heritage, and distinctive flavor of names associated with the history and development of the state. Chair Watts, at this point, would you like me to walk through the bill, or would you prefer that I answer any questions?
Thank you, Ms. LaFramboise. The bill is pretty brief, so feel free to give us a quick overview of the provisions that are in it, and then we can open it up to questions.
All right, this is a housekeeping bill designed to add the Nevada Indian Commission to its members. as a voting member, and this is designed to provide more opportunities for our Native citizens to be able to participate in this important name process. And we have talked to the Nevada Indian Commission, who is in support of this bill. And the State Archives has worked very closely with the Indian Commission. So, I know some of the members and we've done some work for them. So we just wanted to make sure that we are adding all of the voices that are necessary for submitting names to the Geographic Name Board.
Wonderful. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate you bringing this measure forward for our consideration. With that, I will open it up to questions from committee members, and we will start with Assemblyman Wheeler.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. The way I read this, and maybe I'm just reading it wrong, we're going from an 11-member board, voting member board, to a 12 voting member board, which tells me that there will now be, or a possibility now, of 6-6 votes instead of 6-5 or whatever. So what happens on a vote now that is tied? I assume that would be like LegCom, and that vote would fail?
Well, Chair Watts, what happens with the board is, and we've never really had that situation where we've had a tie, and that's what would happen would be that when someone proposes a name, it is put on the agenda for the next meeting, and then we discuss it, and then it goes to a second meeting. It could end up being that, particularly what we want to do between the board meetings is to do any research and due diligence on any research, so that we can find out that, yes, the locals do support this name or they don't support this name, that and sometimes that can make a difference on how a name has been voted. But as I've been on the board for 9 years, and we've never had a situation where we've even had anyone disagree with the name. It's always been unanimous.
Okay, follow up, Mr. Chair.
Yes, but before you do, let me just interject very briefly and remind folks to please state their name for the record. And I'll also say that from my understanding, parliamentary rules for all of these bodies are that in the event that whether it's an odd number or even number, if there is a split vote, that vote fails. So that is pretty commonplace across all decision-making bodies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Assemblyman Wheeler, for the record, and that's my understanding as well, but it's not addressed in this bill, and parliamentary procedures are not always kept. There's a difference, for instance, between Masons and Roberts and a couple of other ones out there. So I just wanted that cleared up and on the record. So I'm assuming it would be a fail, but like I said, we haven't got confirmation of that. If that's what it is, I'd like to see that on the record, because there's never been a split. Doesn't mean there never will be a split. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman Wheeler. I will ask our legal counsel. I believe many members are aware of this, but just to make sure everyone is aware as well as the public, we have our committee counsel is assisting in bill drafting. So I'll reach out and see if we can get some additional clarification for you. But I know that the details of voting procedures for each of these bodies is usually not laid out in statute. So with that, while we're working on that, I'll go on to Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Looking at the bill on, it is one pager, and just on section 1, under H, you're adding the Nevada Indian Commission, and your comments appreciated that it's important that they have a seat at the table. But under L, there's an Intertribal Council of Nevada or its successor. So what are they? Who are they? Are they a native group, or what is that group? If we're adding, because they weren't represented before, or do they represent Nevada Indians, or who are they?
This is Cynthia Laframboise with the Nevada State Library Archives and Public Records. Chair Watt, the Intertribal Council is a Native group. What we wanted to do was provide more input for our Native citizens. In the past, they've often had experienced problems with finding a member who was interested in serving on the State Board on Geographic Names. So we've not always had the type of representatives that we would like from our Native citizens. And this is just another opportunity to add to, besides having the Intertribal Council, to add another area for our Native citizens to be able to propose name changes. We've noticed in this past year that there is a new member on Intertribal Council, and I have spoken with him as well as the Executive Secretary, Christine Johnson, and we were very delighted with speaking with him, and he is quite interested in participating. We've also, in the last year and a half, although unfortunately with COVID, we've not had a meeting. Prior to that, we've had a representative from the Washoe tribe, a young student, anthropology student from UNR, and she belongs to the Washoe. And she has been very instrumental in helping us, particularly with pronouncing Native names, so that we're pronouncing them in a respectful manner. And so while we do have the Intertribal Council, it's we've always had a good relationship with the Indian Commission as well. And so we're just trying to provide another outlet for our Native citizens.
So we would have 2 voting members representing the Native population. Is that correct?
This is Cynthia Laframboise. Yes, this is correct.
And can you tell me how many folks are on the Nevada Indian Commission? How many representatives do they, is that like a body of 100 or 200, so they have a better opportunity to have somebody that represents them on this board? Because what I think I just heard you say was that you needed to add this additional slot because you couldn't get somebody from the Intertribal Council of Nevada to be on this commission or to show up for these meetings. Is that what I heard you say?
This is Cynthia Laframboise from State Library Archives and Public Records. Nevada Indian Commission is a state agency that represents the tribes as well. And I don't know how many people work for the Indian Commission. I can find out if you would like. But this is just, no, and in the past, we have had some issues with trying to ensure that we've gotten participation from our Native citizens through the fact that they don't always have the kind of technical, they aren't always able to attend some of our meetings. We've tried to have them, one in the north and one in the south, at different times. And this is just a way that we have to try to include more participation.
Right. So you're offering them an additional seat at the table. And I understand it would be the Nevada Indian Commission. They would appoint somebody. They would recommend somebody for this position. And then the Intertribal Council of Nevada would recommend somebody for this position. Is that correct?
This is Cynthia Laframboise. Yes, Assemblywoman Titus, that is correct. That they would, in the Indian Commission would appoint a member, and we do have a new member with the Intertribal Council whose name, I'm sorry, has just completely escaped me.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for the questions, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to ask the questions.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Titus. I have a couple of quick questions, and they may add some clarification. So, and you spoke briefly to this in your last response, but just to clarify, I believe the Intertribal Council of Nevada is an association of all the tribal governments, which are within the partially or fully within the borders of the state of Nevada. And so it's essentially a tribal government association, whereas the Indian Commission is a state agency within the state of Nevada. And I believe they have a small but mighty staff and a few board members, whereas the Intertribal Council has representation from every tribal government within the state. Is that your understanding as well?
This is Cynthia LaFramboise. Yes, that is my understanding, Chair Watts, that it does represent all of the tribes, the intertribal.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I just also wanted to, I see here on Section 1, Subsection 1, B, and C, we have a faculty representative from each university, both UNR and UNLV. So there is essentially 2 university representatives on the Board of Geographic Names. That's correct?
This is Cynthia LaFramboise. Yes, Chair Watts, that is correct.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I do appreciate the efforts, especially considering that many of these places had names before other communities came in and quote unquote officially named them. So I appreciate your efforts in bringing this measure forward so that we can have a greater input on naming matters from our indigenous communities. Let's see. All right. Do any other members have questions for the presenter of this bill? Hearing none, thank you so much for the presentation. We will now move on to testimony on Assembly Bill 72. Again, in order to provide testimony on the bill, you must register on the legislative website where you'll be given information to call in. We do ask that commenters limit their testimony to 2 minutes. And with that, I will ask Broadcast Production Services to see if we have anybody on the phone who would like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 72.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support of Assembly Bill 72, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 728. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin now.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Marla McDade Williams, MARLA, MC, capital DADE, WILLIAMS, with Strategies 360, speaking today on behalf of the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. I want to extend my appreciation to Ms. LaFramboise with the Division of State Library Archives and Public Records for requesting this bill and recognizing the importance of tribal inclusion on the State Board of Geographical Names. As you know, Mr. Chair, prior to settlement, Nevada was the territory of the Paiute, Shoshone, and Washoe. As you noted, many historical names used by the tribal people were replaced by settler names, and having representation on this group will contribute to enriching Nevada's history with accurate representation. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. McDade Williams. With that, we will move on to the next caller in support of Assembly Bill 72.
For those that are just joining us, we are on support for Assembly Bill 72. Please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, it seems there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to move on to any testimony in opposition of Assembly Bill 72.
To testify in opposition on Assembly Bill 72, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, it seems there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. And with that, we'd like to see if there's anyone who would like to testify in the neutral position on Assembly Bill 72.
To testify in a neutral position on Assembly Bill 72, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, it seems we have no callers in neutral at this time.
All right. Much broadcast and production services. With that, we will end testimony. And I do have some feedback from legal counsel regarding Assemblyman Wheeler's question. Mason's manual states that a majority of votes cast is sufficient to carry a proposal unless otherwise stated. It further says that a tie vote decides nothing but leaves the situation unchanged. So all of which is to say that should there be a tie vote, then a measure fails according to Mason's manual. And I have not seen other legislative bodies explicitly define what parliamentary procedure is being used in statute. So I did want to at least provide that clarification based on Mason's manual of parliamentary procedure for Assemblyman Wheeler.
Mr. Chair, as you know, all the chair has to do is change the rules, but it's not that big a deal.
Thank you for the question. I do appreciate it. With that, are there any closing remarks from the presenter of the bill?
Yes, this is Cynthia Laframboise with the State Library Archives and Public Records, and I would like to thank you and the committee for this opportunity to testify this afternoon. And if you have any questions, then you please feel free to contact me.
Thank you very much. Once again, we appreciate you bringing this bill forward and for presenting it to the committee today. With that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 72, and we will now open up the hearing on Assembly Bill 71, which revises provisions relating to certain information maintained by the Division of Natural Heritage of the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. With that, whenever the presenter for Assembly Bill 71 is ready, they may proceed.
Good afternoon, Chair Watts, a member of the committee. For the record, my name is Jim Lawrence, and I serve as the Deputy Director for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And with me to my right is Kristen Szabo, who is the Administrator for the Division of Natural Heritage, which is one of the 8 divisions within our department. I want to thank you, Chair, and the committee for the opportunity to present the bill this afternoon. With your permission, I'd like to make a couple of opening comments and then turn it over to Administrator Szabo to walk you through the bill, because I know there might be some questions.
Yes, that sounds good. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I want to say the Division of Natural Heritage, their primary responsibility is that they are the keeper of the database of the state's at-risk, threatened, protected, either plant or animal or biotic species or ecological conditions. They're a very small division. They're a division of about 8 to 9 people. They're not the ones that do the data collection. Our database is highly dependent on the voluntary contribution of the data to the database, whether it be from federal land management agencies, maybe local governments, private properties. And it's our responsibility to maintain that database so that we have a clear picture on where we are with the various species within the state. This is a program that is mirrored in every state in the U.S. Every state in the U.S. has this type of database program, and it's connected through a network in order to make sure that there is a database of where these species are located. Similar to other resources, perhaps, cultural resources or historic resources, there is a need from time to time to mask certain location data. Sometimes, and most often, it is in order to make sure that that sensitive species or that location is protected. It's a very common practice, and it's common practice that's done by many divisions in many states as well. One of the reasons also is maybe this is voluntary information. We might have to mask information in order to protect certain sensitive private property information as well. Again, this is voluntary information, and so we need this information in order to make sure we don't have any data gaps in our database. Lastly, before I turn it over to Chris, I want to say that really what this bill does is it puts into statute the existing practice. Like I said, this is a very common practice. We do have policies and protocols for protecting and confidential and sensitive data. Our intent with this legislation was to actually become more transparent, and as opposed to have it be perhaps agency guidelines, we wanted to make it very clear in statute basically when data can remain confidential and sensitive. And so that was our intent with this bill. I know that there are some questions regarding the bill, and I really am thankful that we get to present and appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion and ideally clear up any sort of misconceptions on the intent of this bill. With that, I would like to turn it over to Administrator Szabo, and she can walk you through the bill.
Thank you. Please proceed whenever you're ready, Administrator.
Good afternoon, Chair Watson, members of the committee. My name is Kristen Szabo. I'm the administrator of the Nevada Division of Natural Heritage, and I am pleased to be here today as well to present Assembly Bill 71, which, if passed, will keep certain natural heritage data confidential. And before I walk you through the sections of the bill, I'd like to give you some background on the Division of Natural Heritage for context. The division is a non-regulatory agency whose mission is to develop and maintain a cost-effective, centralized information source and inventory of the locations, biology, and conservation status of all imperiled plants and animals in Nevada. The division is a member of the NatureServe Network, an international network of natural heritage programs in the US, Canada, Latin America, and the Caribbean that provide the scientific basis for effective conservation action. The division manages data for hundreds of native plant and animal species that are listed as threatened or endangered or designated as candidates for listing as threatened or endangered under the Federal Endangered Species Act, considered sensitive by the US Forest Service or Bureau of Land Management, protected under state law, or considered rare or at risk of extinction by the Division of Natural Heritage. And natural heritage data are used by a variety of public and private entities early in the planning process to help minimize costly resource conflicts and to streamline federally mandated environmental reviews. The use of our data assists in quick, efficient, and informed land use planning and conservation planning decisions with the intention of striking a balance between economic development and species conservation. The data maintained by the division may be considered sensitive for a variety of reasons. In addition to a species itself being considered sensitive because of its listing status or risk of extinction, there are several other reasons why data may be considered sensitive, such as the disclosure of a species location which could result in poaching or collection threats. The data are considered proprietary, the data involve private land and the landowner has requested confidentiality, or the species or its habitat is considered fragile. Locations that fall within one of these categories are marked quote unquote data sensitive in the Natural Heritage Database, and the precise locations are obscured. This is similar to redacting a person's address. We're simply obscuring the precise coordinates to protect the location, but the data are still made available to the requester. It's also important to note that not all data in the Natural Heritage Database are necessarily data sensitive. Only those data that fall within one of the data sensitive categories mentioned. I will now walk through a summary of the Assembly Bill 71. So Section 1, Subsection 2 makes confidential any information related to the location of a rare plant or animal species or ecological community included in the division's data systems. Section 1, Subsection 3 authorizes the administrator or designee to release confidential information under certain conditions and for a reasonable fee. Confidential information can be released if it is not otherwise prohibited by law, not restricted by the original provider, is made for a legitimate activity related to conservation, environmental review, or scientific research, is limited to the amount of information necessary to achieve the purpose of the request, and if the release is unlikely to harm the rare species or ecological community. This is the division's standard practice, even though the confidentiality of the records is not yet formally recognized in statute. Section 1, subsection 5 defines the term rare plant or animal species or ecological community. These include the federal, state, and Division of Natural Heritage designations mentioned earlier in my testimony. Section 2 is a confirming change, that being the inclusion of natural heritage data as exempt from public records. And if passed, I don't expect that this will change how we currently do business, but it would provide an extra level of protection for those data-sensitive locations. Currently, when the division receives a data request that results in data-sensitive locations, we obscure the data-sensitive locations when providing the data to the client, and the client is aware of this data limitation because they've signed the division's data license agreement. However, the division may provide precise locations on a case-by-case basis. Currently, a modest fee is charged for staff time to manage data and respond to data requests. The fee is not a condition of releasing the data. These are charged on a sliding scale depending on the number of location records provided. If no records occur within the project area, no fee is charged. If 500 records or less are provided, the fee is $2 per record with a $50 minimum. The next 500 records are $1 per record, and additional records over 1,000 are 50 cents per record with a maximum charge of $5,000. The fee doesn't cover the entire cost to maintain the database, but is intended to offset some of the costs. And all data request fees collected by the division are reverted to our primary funding source, the Nevada Department of Transportation, at the end of each fiscal year. I'd also like to point out that through my counterparts at other natural heritage programs across the country, one of the many benefits of being part of the NatureServe network is networking with all of these people. I've learned that the protection of data-sensitive locations is a common challenge that we all share, and many states have passed similar legislation to protect sensitive data. And there are at least 12 states that I'm aware of that have implemented similar data protections to varying degrees. A list of these states and links to their statutes can be provided to the committee if needed. And lastly, I'd like to mention 2 amendments that were submitted to the committee. The first is a minor amendment submitted by the Division of Natural Heritage to add federal candidate species to the definition of rare species in Section 5A. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service often determines that species are warranted for listing but precluded based on higher priorities, and those species become candidates for listing. Therefore, we would like to treat candidate species similar to threatened and endangered species. The second amendment is a friendly amendment submitted by Clark County to include the need for a written agreement between the requester and the division. We agree with this amendment, and this is current standard practice for the division to have requesters sign our data license agreement annually, or in the case of some public agencies, enter into a longer-term agreement agreed upon by both parties. And I'm also aware of and agree with the amendment submitted by the committee to clarify language related to reasonable fees. That concludes my testimony. Thanks for the opportunity to present AB 71 to keep certain natural heritage data confidential, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Administrator Szabo. We are going to do a brief detour. I have learned that we had somebody who wanted to provide testimony on Assembly Bill 72 who had some technical difficulties getting through. So I'm going to briefly stop the hearing on Assembly Bill 71 and reopen the hearing on Assembly Bill 72, just so that we can get this on the record. And I'll ask Broadcast Production Services if we have that person and can connect them in order to provide their testimony on Assembly Bill 72.
Thank you, Chair. To provide your testimony on Assembly Bill 72, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, to provide testimony for Assembly Bill 72, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 665. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin now. Caller with the last 3 digits, 665. Please press star 6 to unmute. I apologize, Chair, but it looks like they may still be having some technical difficulties.
All right, well, that's okay. We'll give it another shot later on. Wanted to try and get them in before we dive into Assembly Bill 71, but we'll give it a shot later on in the meeting. So with that, we'll close the hearing on Assembly Bill 72. We'll resume the hearing on Assembly Bill 71. We'll start questions with Assemblyman Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple questions that when I read through this bill and really tried to get in it, I understand both sides of the which side of the creek you're on this thing, but there was a letter that was written by several people that asked for to reject the bill based on transparency. But you look and it says maintaining transparency will allow the public access to information, for example, access such records to prove the important compound of the conservation. To me, I can understand where somebody wanted to make sure that they're protected, but the problem is if it gets out, then people could actually go out there and do damage or harm to animals. So I see both sides of this, but I also see the biggest fear I have is by opening and open it up, they could do the damage, but closing it, what would happen in the future if somebody wanted to go in there and start closing areas or not releasing the information back to the public on stuff that we're not even knowing is happening? So can you address that? And I hope I can make that a little clearer for you. Can somebody actually go and put something on the endangered species list, like a plant or an animal or anything, without the public being known that it's going to be listed? Can you answer that? Thank you.
Hi, Kristen Zabo for the record. To answer your question, I don't know of any way something could get listed as an endangered species without the public knowing. There's a process the federal government goes through to list on the Endangered Species Act.
Could it be maintained thinking that it was lifted, but it wasn't? I don't know. I see fear with this bill, and I can understand what the people wrote. The letter February 23rd, and it was signed by several different people. And have you got that letter?
Kristen Zabo for the record. No, I don't have a copy of that letter.
Okay, it had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 signatures on it, 7 businesses or organizations. And that come into the office on the 23rd. But I do have a problem with being extended. Say there was an endangered species. I'll give you an example, like the cutthroat trout in Jarbidge. Say they lifted that. Could that still stay as private and stay on the list of endangered species?
So So there's two different things happening. There's the list of endangered species, which is something that the federal government, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service maintains. And then there's the data that we maintain in our database, which includes listed species, but also includes sensitive species. So if a species was removed from the Endangered Species Act, that would be a public process. People would know. But that doesn't necessarily mean it still wouldn't be sensitive within the state, and we would maintain that data. It would still be a sensitive species, maybe to natural heritage, based on the criteria that we use to rank species, their conservation status. So it still could remain on our list, and we would still maintain data on that species. And then particular locations, depending on the species, might be marked data sensitive. So if someone were to request that data, we would obscure the location. So you would still get a list or your GIS files that say this particular species occurs in your project area, but you might not get the exact coordinates to avoid any harassment or disturbance to that location.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Assemblyman Ellis, if I may add on a little bit to that answer by Kristen. For the record, Jim Lawrence, Deputy Director, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. I do want to make it clear that the Division of Natural Heritage is entirely non-regulatory. They just maintain the database for information purposes. They do not make the decisions on whether something is to be listed, on the federal listing or even the state listing. There's an entire different process. They just maintain the database just for the purposes that we needed to kind of know the lay of the land, so to speak. If something were to become non-listed, then it would not fall under this criteria that we're proposing, most likely. So then it would be released. We do need to protect certain location data. And I think as a good example, there might be the threatened or endangered raptor, for instance. And so we would release the data that, yes, there is something present, but not necessarily that specific tree and exactly where that nest is. And as Kristen said, that is to make sure that there, in certain cases, that there's not harassment at that specific exact location. And that's sort of the need for the masking of the certain data. So hopefully that helps, and thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. And for the record, Mr. Chair, the letter that I did receive, I don't know if everybody got it, but it was signed by Center Biological Diversity, Nevada Press Association, Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, Great Basin Water Network, Nevada Open Government Council, a coalition, ACLU, and Sunrise Movement of Las Vegas. That was a letter I received. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just briefly note a couple of things. One is that the letter you referenced was uploaded to Nellis and is available as an exhibit to everyone. In addition, I believe you were asking some clarifying questions about how this statute would work, but I would remind members that if you're referencing a letter from the opponent of the bill and are asking questions that are really aimed at the opponent of the bill, that you reserve those questions for testimony in opposition. Last thing that I will note is that while many of the questions here were focused on federal action, there are still within subsection 5 of section 1 of the bill in paragraph C and D classifications from the state, including the Board of Wildlife Commissioners, and others that are, as well as E, that are designations by the state. So it would be possible for a federal designation to be changed at some point, but for a state designation to remain. And then I believe the administrator spoke to the specific data fields that may be modified over time as sensitive or not. So I just wanted to make sure that that clarification was put on the record. And with that, I believe that we have a question from Assemblywoman Anderson next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Lawrence, as well as Administrator Zabo, for the presentation. Really appreciated how straightforward it was. That was very good to have. I do have a question regarding Section 3C, the language used in subsection 1 of that, where it's the phrase legitimate activity. And although you did state it when you were doing the presentation, those items are not stated in the law. So I'll tell you before you answer where my concerns are coming from. It's a possibility that although you are not individuals who you are collecting the data, you do not make those judgments called. That's been made very clear in the presentation. This is a judgment call. And what happens if it is a politically motivated group that is coming through that you might not agree, not you personally, but a future administrator or their designee might disagree. I'm very concerned with that phrase of legitimate activity without that being defined further. So can you possibly define that a little bit better or make some possible other ideas as to how we can get that clearer?
Hi, Kristen Zabel for the record. Thank you, Assemblywoman Anderson. I'm not quite sure how to define legitimate activity more than it's already defined there as conservation activity, environmental review, or scientific research. Those are the primary reasons we're contacted and people request data for those types of things. And I can't think of a reason that we turn away a customer. We provide data. That's our job. So I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question fully at this time.
And I respect that. And so sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may follow up.
Please do follow up.
Thank you. I respect that answer. I understand that that's as far as you believe it can go. I disagree, and so at this time, I have some serious concerns about the request. And so, if you could send us those other 12 states, the information that are in their laws, to see if it is that similar language, or if there's possibility of some other qualifications, or not qualifications, excuse me, clarifications, so that this way it's a little bit more both consistent as well as a little bit more open for our members of the public who are interested in this information. So if you could send that to the whole committee, I think that would be very helpful.
Yes, Kristen Zabel for the record. We can definitely send that over.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Anderson, for that question. And yes, please do, when you send that follow-up information, send it to our committee staff, and we'll ensure that it's distributed to all of the members for their information. I believe we also have a question from Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Assemblywoman Gonzalez, Assembly District 16 for the record. I have a question about Section 1, Subsection 3, where it says, the administrator or his or her designee may release information declared confidential. So is this saying that the administrator can release information that is, I guess my question is like, it's basically up to the administrator if they want to release this information. Is that what this is saying? Without the sections that are underlined in subsection 3.
Thank you for the record, Jim Lawrence, Deputy Director, DCNR, and thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. I think regarding paragraph or subsection 3 in section 1, I think it does a few things. One is it makes it clear that the administrator or his or her designee, which is sort of typical government bureaucratic language that means that the administrator can delegate some of these duties to the deputy administrator in case the administrator is not around. What it does is it sets forth the conditions. And it basically, again, this was to make it more transparent, the existing practice that we've been doing and other folks do. So basically, the intent here is that the confidential information can be released by the division, the administrator or the designee, under these certain conditions. And that way, we felt by putting it into statute, it was very clear to the public, what are the conditions that need to be met for confidential information to be released.
Thank you so much. Chair, may I ask a follow-up question, please?
Yes, please proceed.
So you're saying that the only way that an administrator would release the information is if the request fell under one of these categories that are listed out.
Kristen Zabo, for the record, correct.
Thank you so much.
And if I may follow up, Chair, this is just regarding confidential information that's being deemed confidential. As Administrator Zabo said, there's a lot of information in our database that don't meet the criteria of confidential information, and that's just released routinely.
Thank you for that. I believe that we have a question from Assemblywoman Cohen next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director and Administrator, for the presentation. My question kind of follows up on Assemblywoman Anderson's. So in Section 1, Sub 3, when the administrator is making decisions, is that appealable?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. For the record, Jim Lawrence again. This, it's our understanding, this might be a better question for your legal counsel. Our understanding is that this would be an administrative decision, just like other administrative decisions and statutes. And, there is a process for challenging those administrative decisions, but I'm not the best one to probably to articulate that. And so perhaps I would defer to your legal counsel if you desire on sort of the mechanics of appealing administrative decisions.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We can ask counsel after the hearing. I know he's occupied.
Thank you. We'll put that request into legal, and once we have an update, we'll make sure it gets shared with all of the members of the committee. I also have a couple of questions. I guess first I'll just follow up and try and ask some clarifying questions on subsection 3 here. So, essentially there are a couple of terms it looks like in this section of the statute that impart discretion on the agency to decide whether they can grant a request. And it looks like the first is the use of the word may at the start of subsection 3. So even if all of the conditions under it are met, the agency is not required to release this information. The other is the word legitimate within subsection C, paragraph 1, so that there is some determination must be made that not only is the activity related to conservation, environmental review, or scientific research, but that it's legitimate. And so those impart discretion onto the agency to make these decisions whether the information can be released to a party. Is that correct? Is that your intent with the legislation?
Thank you, Chair Watts, for the question. And I'll take the first shot at that, and then let Kristen follow up if needed. I would say in subsection 3, the may, it's really the permissive language. You're right. It is basically, I think when we drafted the language, we wanted to set forth the conditions of which confidential information could be released or may be released. And so I don't know if there was a lot of thought between the may and the shall. It was really just to give that authority to release confidential information under certain conditions. So I mean, it's a good question, and that's kind of how we thought about it. You know, the legitimate activity, which was a great question, and was a question raised by Assemblywoman Anderson as well. Our intent here, you know, as Kristen said, our intent is really to only provide this information for legitimate reasons. And I understand the question that, well, who decides legitimate? Isn't that subjective? We really did try to narrow it to certain activities that I think for folks like us that live in the world every day, it becomes very apparent, but you know, maybe not so much to folks that don't live in this world every day. You know, obviously the intent here is to make sure that the data is used and used for legitimate purposes, not to give it out, you know, to tour groups that are then going around and, you know, going into these sensitive locations and trampling ecological conditions, or for even worse reasons, somebody that's interested in knowing where these plant species are so they can go collect them. Clearly our intent was to make sure that it was really for legitimate purposes. That really is the intent. I think you've raised some good questions, and I think it's probably beholden on us to go back. A lot of this was taken from other states' legislation, but perhaps maybe do a deeper dive and see if we can maybe better define that for this committee. But that clearly was our intent, and hopefully that answers your question. I know it wasn't maybe as specific as you would have liked, but that is our intent. And I don't know, Kristen, if you had anything to add.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and it is sometimes important to really clarify for the record the intent of those bringing forward the legislation, and it may be, it sounds like it may be an issue where some additional work is needed to ensure that the statute aligns with the intent. So I appreciate the response. I think it was sufficient. I had another question, which is really kind of in subsection 2 of section 1, the information related to the location of a rare plant or animal species. And I know that, you know, within your testimony, you've specifically talked about the locational data itself. And it was even mentioned the redacting of that locational data. So again, I just want to get some clarity for the record. If there are other public records that are requested that are fall within our state's public records law, but happen to include some form of data point related to the location of one of these species, is it your understanding and your intent that the location would be redacted, but the document would be provided, or would the entire document be able to be withheld if it contained any sensitive location information?
Thank you for the question, Chair Watts. Kristen Zabo for the record. We would provide the data and just, provide an obscured location if it was something that was deemed data sensitive.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the clarification. I appreciate that. I have one more question, thank you. And that is for the fee that is discussed, the reasonable fee for the provision of records. Can you provide any information on what fee is currently charged for public records requests within the division, and also just speak to, the committee's amendment was submitted to clarify language to make sure that it couldn't be interpreted that the determining factor for a document being unclassified was the payment of a fee. So I just want, if you can speak to clarifying that that's not your intent, that you currently have a public records process that has a fee, and could provide a little bit of information on what that is. I think that would be helpful to the committee.
Thank you. Kristen Zabo for the record. Yes, so our current process is we have a data request form and our data license agreement. on our website. So if somebody wants to request data, they can go to our website, click on request data, and there's all the information. There's all the forms you can download, fill out, and it tells you where to submit them. And then it goes to our data manager, and the request is fulfilled. And if there's no records returned within the project area that you submit, there's no fee. And so we just provide a letter that states, we did the search and there's no records were returned within this particular area, and then we don't follow up with an invoice. So if we do the search and data and records are returned, and when I say record, I mean a specific location record. So it could be one species, but several different locations fall within your project area of one species, or it could be multiple species each with one location. Then we invoice according to the number of records that were returned. So, and that's based on a sliding scale. There's a $50 minimum. So for the first 500 records, it's $2 a record with that $50 minimum. For the next 500 records up to 1,000, it's $1 a record. And then after 1,000 records, it's 50 cents a record with a $5,000 maximum.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, is there anything you wish to add?
And thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, for the record, Jim Lawrence. A couple of things. I think Chris did a great job talking about the structure, and it is a current structure in place, and it's really never been a challenge or a problem. Again, we're just trying to make things clear in statute. I think I heard a couple of questions. One is, is it a condition upon the release? No, it's not a condition. That's not our intent. Is to be heavy-handed. For the committees, I know this isn't a budget committee, but just for your information, this is a very small division. It is largely, in fact, if not entirely, paid through state highway funds. And the reason for that is NDOT is Department of Transportation is one of our biggest customers, quite honestly. As you can imagine, if they're contemplating a road extension or a new road, they need to know, where the species are. And so we get funding from them. We have this small fee in place, like other states, for the data sharing, basically. We don't keep it. This isn't to build up an empire or anything like that. Whatever we collect, it basically gets reverted back to offset the highway fund. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a context of the intent of the fee. And I apologize, Chair Watts, I may have missed one of your points in your questions, and so I apologize, and I'd be happy to answer anything more.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. That answered my question, so I appreciate you providing that clarification. One last point I will provide for the record, our legal counsel did let us know that normally Chapter 233B of the Nevada Revised Statutes would apply when it comes to appeals. It's a little bit fuzzy. An argument could be made that it doesn't apply since this is not a contested case or an administrative proceeding per se. And so if we wanted to make clear that such a decision could be appealed, we would likely want to explicitly include that language within this statute. So I just wanted to provide that legal analysis for the record as well. I believe we had one quick follow-up question from Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Assemblywoman Gonzalez, Assembly District 16. I just have two clarifying questions. So I think a lot of us are confused on the may in Section 3. So is there, or would there be an event where a person who files a request does fall in one of these sections? However, the administrator has still determined to not release the records. And then a follow-up to that is for folks who do receive denial, is there an explanation as to why their request was denied?
Thank you for the question. Kristen Zabo for the record. I can't think of any examples of us not providing data from the past. I can't foresee any reason why we wouldn't. We're just really trying to protect those sensitive locations. So that's why we have the practice of obscuring the locations so that you will receive the data, you just won't receive the exact location of where something that is considered data sensitive occurs. So I hope that answers your question. And I can't remember if I answered your first question or not. Sorry.
No worries. I asked if, so in the section where it says, you know, the administrator may release information, and then it lists out why, the reasons why they would release it. So my question is, let's say I qualify under, I don't know, section, one of these sections. Is there a reason why I would still be denied? And I guess I'm still hung up on this may release information part, because it does give them the authority to may or not may, right? So if I qualify under one of these sections, would your office still be able to deny my request? And then my other question is, if the request is denied, am I given a written reason of why it was denied?
Kristen Zabel for the record. So I can't think, if you fall under one of these conditions, for lack of a better word, I can't foresee any reason why we would deny providing data. I mean, the purpose of providing the data is to inform land use decisions, planning decisions. So it's to the resources benefit for you to know what's out there so that you can plan your project accordingly. But we feel it's our responsibility to also protect those sensitive locations. But I can't foresee a reason why we would deny release of information if you meet these criteria.
And if I may add on, Mr. Chair, I think the second part to that question from Assemblywoman Gonzalez is, if there was a denial, would we give a reason? And I think the answer to that is yes, we would. I think that's just our common practice in all of our department and all of our divisions in our department is to document and give reasons why. I think it's kind of hard for us to answer because folks that have asked for data under these conditions, we've given it and we've never had a denial. So it's not a situation that hasn't really come up, but yes, the answer is yes. Of course, we would give a reason.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the division on this bill? Hearing none, thank you again for the presentation. We will now open up testimony on Assembly Bill 71. We will start with testimony in support of the bill. And I will ask Broadcast Production Services to please open up the queue and see if anyone wishes to testify in support of Assembly Bill 71.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support on Assembly Bill 71, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 109. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin now.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, Justin Harrison, Justin Harrison, here representing Clark County. We are here today in support of Assembly Bill 71 and would first just like to thank Administrator Szabo as well as Deputy Director Lawrence for their willingness to work with the county on the proposed amendment language that's been submitted. I hope you all have had the chance to review that proposed amendment language that's been posted to Nellis and I believe distributed to all of the committee members. The Clark County Department of Environment and Sustainability regularly works with the Division of Natural Heritage to request and share data related to managing wildlife and their habitats, as well as to conduct research and conservation work that benefit those species. And we appreciate that working relationship we have with the department, and specifically the Division of Natural Heritage. we'd be happy to walk through that amendment if that is the pleasure of the chair or if necessary. But if not, we'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I will just remind folks that the agency did note that this is a friendly amendment. Do any members have questions for Mr. Harrison specifically about the content of the amendment provided by Clark County? All right, hearing none. Thank you again, Mr. Harrison, for your testimony.
Thank you.
BPS, move on to the next caller in support of Assembly Bill 71.
If you are just joining us, we are on support for testimony on Assembly Bill 71. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, it seems there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. With that, we will move on to testimony in opposition of Assembly Bill 71.
To testify in opposition on Assembly Bill 71, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 792. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin now.
My name is Patrick Donnelly, Patrick Donnelly, and I'm Nevada State Director with the Center for Biological Diversity. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. We are speaking today in opposition to AB 71. This bill would unduly restrict public access to important information and undermine open government and transparency laws. DCNR has come under scrutiny recently due to public records requests by my organization pertaining to the rare plant Teams buckwheat, which we allege is threatened with extinction by an open pit mine. Now, this bill has come out to ostensibly protect species, but in reality, a side effect would be it will harm the ability of nonprofit organizations like mine to advocate for the protection of species and hold government agencies accountable for following the law and protecting our environment. The records requests we've done have revealed that DCNR is making attempts to avoid the public records scrutiny. As you've seen in the letter we sent around, there's evidence that DCNR staff have been instructed not to use the words Teams buckwheat in emails in order to avoid public records requests. A recent records request I just got back had over 30 documents and email chains declared privileged and exempt, something that DCNR has not previously done with our requests. This legislation would also allow DCNR to have unfettered discretion over who they deem has a, quote, legitimate activity, unquote, with the species. This could lend itself to First Amendment concerns if certain parties, such as my organization, are not in political favor with the department. DCNR has not put forward any examples where public records requests have resulted in harm to species. There is one infamous recent example of damage to an endangered species with Teams buckwheat, but DCNR blamed that on squirrels. Perhaps the squirrels did a public records request. In short, this legislation appears geared at stymieing public access to information held by DCNR. There do need to be reforms in DCNR's adherence to the Public Records Act, not a further ratcheting back of our right to government transparency. And we did submit a letter to you signed by a number of environmental groups, open government advocates, and social justice organizations opposing this bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly, for your testimony. And I will note for members and the public that the letter Mr. Donnelly referenced has been uploaded on Nellis as an exhibit for this meeting and this bill. With that, we'll move on to the next caller in opposition on Assembly Bill 71.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 946. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin now.
Hello, my name is Madeline Reese, MaDelynReese. I'm a volunteer with the Sierra Club Toyabe Chapter Legislative Committee, and I'm here speaking today representing more than 7,000 members and 30,000 supporters in Nevada and urging you to oppose AB 71. Sierra Club appreciates and supports the mission and staff of the Nevada Division of Natural Heritage. Division officials are stewards tasked with helping the public understand the status of threatened, endangered, rare and at-risk plant and animal species in the state. The data the division acquires and catalogs are used to navigate the complexities between conservation and development of natural resources. We know that's not an easy task. However, we believe that exempting such a broad swath of records as proposed in AB 71 will not be in the public's best interest. Specifically, we don't agree with Section 1, Subsection 2, and Section 1, Subsection 3. These provisions give officials broad, sweeping discretion to conceal data and limit who can access public records and when. We cannot rule out the potential for political misuse of AB 71. We must also consider the broad range of documents that could now be omitted from public oversight, such as emails, text messages, reports, and other correspondence by the sheer mention of a certain species, like Patrick mentioned in his earlier comment. In conversations that we've had with the division, we were offered no examples of state data leading to harm. Therefore, we're unsure of the imminent need for this project. Suggestions for the division to help solve this purported problem includes fuzzing the data sets to protect species locations, creating a public education program with NGO partners like the Sierra Club, identifying all data sets that can be delivered to the public without approval and in time, and more. In closing, the Sierra Club believes access to public records is key to a healthy democracy. In the balancing test of disclosure versus censorship, open access must always, always, always outweigh the repression of information. The public must have access to open information in order to ensure the fair and transparent access to this information. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. With that, we'll move on to the next caller in opposition of Assembly Bill 71.
Caller with the last three digits, 807. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin now.
My name is Richard Carpel. That's Karpel. I'm the executive director of the Nevada Press Association, and I'm today also testifying on behalf of the Nevada Open Government Coalition. We share the concerns about AB 71 that have been articulated by others in opposition to the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carpel, for your testimony. We'll go on to the next caller in opposition of Assembly Bill 71.
Caller with the last three digits, 922. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin now.
Sorry. Hello, for the record, my name is Ainsley Archibald, speaking as a coordinator of the Sunrise Movement Las Vegas Hub. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. We are speaking today in opposition to AB 71. We support transparency and believe the information this bill would make exempt to public records requests should continue to be accessible to the public. I trust the conservationists when they say they need this information to support campaigns to save sensitive species from threats and extinction. As a proud member of Team Buckwheat to Save Teams Buckwheat, we are concerned this bill would exist not to protect such species, but to promote a culture of secrecy and shield the Nevada Division of Natural Heritage from scrutiny and criticism. We were happy to sign on to the coalition letter and fully support the concerns raised in it. We oppose AB 71. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We'll go on to the next caller in opposition.
Caller with the last three digits, 662. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin now.
My name is Kyle Roerink, Kyleroerink. I am the executive director of the Great Basin Water Network. Mr. Chair and committee members, we oppose AB 71. The Great Basin Water Network represents a diverse cohort of water users and conservation interests throughout the state and has had many partnerships with government entities and quasi-governmental entities over decades. We've participated in complex litigation and regulatory matters that have required us to file public records requests. Public access to government documents is an important accountability mechanism that we have for ensuring our public servants are working for the public good. It is also a way to better understand the goings-on in state or local government. Any proposal to exempt records from public view is potentially setting up a situation where we, the public, could be left in the dark as it relates to the official business of an agency or division. We cannot discount the fact that AB 71 could be used one day to conceal information from the public eye without proper justification or consequence. We must also consider the broad range of documents that could be wrapped up in this bill. The scope is large: reports, memos, emails, text messages, and other correspondence, to name a few. The bill does not imply that any documents containing locations would be released if the locations were redacted. The language is much more sweeping and broad. There are times when concealment of records is allowable, but aside from those very narrow exceptions, we must be inclined to shine a light on the work of our public stewards. This bill is not narrow. It is important to note that proponents haven't given one example of open data leading to harm of the species. Specifically with the language, Section 1, Subsection 2 undermines the foundations of our current public records law and sets a dangerous precedent. Next, Section 1, Subsection 3, 1 through 3, gives officials the ability to pick and choose who get what documents and when, another dangerous precedent. Giving an administrator the ability to determine what is or is not a legitimate activity is very dangerous. That should give us pause. Right now, lawmakers are being asked to weigh the effect of concealing information or maintaining free and open access to documents. We believe the scales of justice must always tip toward unfettered disclosure to ensure the health and well-being of our democracy and our republic. We have to ask how much power we want to hand to unelected officials at the sake of open access. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Rowley. We'll move on to the next caller in opposition.
Caller with the last three digits, 130, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin now.
Good evening. My name is Christine Saunders. That's CHRISTINESAUNDERS. And I'm the Policy Director with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada. I just want to echo the sentiments of those who spoke before me and add our opposition to Assembly Bill 71 to the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Saunders. I appreciate the ditto of previous comments. With that, we'll move on to the next caller in opposition.
We are on opposition for Assembly Bill 71. If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in opposition, please use *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, it seems there are no more callers in opposition.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to testimony in the neutral position on Assembly Bill 71.
To testify in the neutral position on Assembly Bill 71, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in neutral testimony, excuse me.
Thank you very much, Broadcast and Production Services. With that, we will end testimony, and I will invite the department and division to offer any closing. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, for the record, Jim Lawrence, Deputy Director, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Again, really appreciate the opportunity to present the bill and get on the record our intentions with this bill. I think a couple of things. I really appreciate the questions and comments from the committee members. And one of the things that we certainly heard is, going back and taking a look at subsection 3 under section 1 regarding the may and the shall, and perhaps a better definition of what defines a conservation activity or an educational activity. So we will certainly do that. I think those are good comments and very easy to follow up on. Appreciate hearing the comments from the opposition as well. I think obviously we disagree with some of the premise on our intentions. Our intentions really is to make it very clear the instances when we can release confidential information. We want to get that information out to the appropriate parties and release confidential information for the reasons of protection and stewardship. There are instances we do want to make sure that data does not get into a situation where, perhaps I retire and I decide I want to do tours to see the last peregrine falcon nest, and I want to go exactly there and take hordes of people there. And then that really, if you work in the ecological environmental field, that type of disturbance can be very damaging to some of our threatened and endangered species. So we really are from a place of protecting these species, but also making sure the data is used for the appropriate purposes. There was a comment regarding, my department and the team's buckwheat. I do want to point out that the team's buckwheat would not classify as confidential information. And so in that case, it would just be released. So again, this is really to take a look at these sensitive, confidential information, data that's been given to us voluntarily, sometimes has sensitive private property information. And we do need to redact some of that specific information to protect either private property rights or basically to protect the resource as well. This is also, lastly, I would say, again, the intent is to make our practice transparent. This is a very common practice by other heritage programs. We've been doing this practice. It's also very common in the historic and cultural resources field. It breaks my heart when I read a newspaper article of somebody that's damaged and taken home a petroglyph, for instance. Sometimes it is just very important to basically protect the specific sensitive locations, and that is our intent. Actually, it's to make it more transparent, to put it in statute, our practices, as opposed to make it maybe an internal policy or procedure. We're really trying to be clear in statute when we can release confidential information. So with that, I thank the committee for its time this afternoon, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Thank you, Ms. Szabo, for your presentation of the bill. We look forward to receiving some of the reference materials that were mentioned previously in regards to other states' regulations or statutes, and look forward to continuing the discussion on this bill. With that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 71. That leaves one item left on our agenda today, and that is public comment. Again, in order to provide public comment, you must register on the legislative website. And again, we do ask commenters to please limit their remarks to 2 minutes. With that, we'll again turn it over to Broadcast Production Services to see if we have anybody in the queue for public comments.
Thank you, Chair. To take your place in the public comment queue, please press *9 now. Caller with the last 3 digits, 665. Please press *6 to unmute and slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin now.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Stacy Montooth. That's spelled STACEY MONTOOTH. I'm a citizen of the Walker River Paiute Nation and the executive director of the Nevada Indian Commission. I want to extend my appreciation to the Division of State and Library Archives and Public Records for seeking to add a representative from the Nevada Indian Commission to the State Board on Geographic Names. The Nevada Indian Commission was established by statute in 1965 with the charge of improving the lives of our 27 tribal nations, bands, and colonies, plus the 50,000 Native Americans who are indigenous to other lands outside of the state but choose to make Nevada their home. The Nevada Indian Commission, with our staff of 4 and 5 volunteers appointed by the governor to serve on our advisory body, we would be honored to have the role outlined in AB 72. I apologize for my difficulty with the technology today. It was completely user error. I stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Montooth, for your testimony. I'm glad that you were able to dial in and provide that I'll ask the committee secretary to reclassify this public comment as support for Assembly Bill 72. And thank you again for your remarks. We can move on to the next caller broadcast.
We are currently on public comment. If you would like to take your place in the queue, press *9 now. Chair, the public line is open and working, but it seems there are no callers at this time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, committee members, for your questions and engagement in the bill hearings today. Thank you again to Broadcast Production Services for all of the assistance that you provide in making sure that members of the public and other interested parties can participate in our meetings. With that, that concludes our meeting for today. Our next meeting will be on Monday, March at 4 p.m. Everyone be prepared for it to go a little bit longer than this, as it is a presentation from the Division of Water Resources and the first water-related bills of the session for our committee. With that, thank you again, and this meeting is adjourned.